Okay, so I'm recording my screen now. Um, so I guess we'll start. My name is Aliya Miranda. I'm conducting this interview with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. It's April 8th. I'm conducting this interview with Isabella Oliver and Sueliana Davila. Um, who is the subject of our interview. Suli, can you spell out your name for the record?
Yes. First name Sueliana is Sueliana. Last name Davila, Davila.
Awesome. So Suli, can you tell us what year you were born?
I was born in 1996.
And where were you born?
Sebring, Florida.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us where you live now and what your current occupation is?
Yes. So right now I live in Gainesville, Florida. I moved here after graduating high school about 5 years ago. I've had a lot of different occupations, but currently I am a CNA for TARES Health and Rehab, and I have been working with them collectively about a year and a half now.
Sorry about that. So we wanted to talk with you a little bit about your journey into healthcare. So what has it been that got you into wanting to study healthcare as a profession?
Yes, so I always say it started with my mom. She was a medical receptionist for a doctor in minor surgeries for a long time. So she would always talk to me about like these patients, nothing personal, but just like the conditions they're in and like wounds. And instead of like shying away from it and thinking it was gross and stuff, because like I want to know more. I was like, can you show me pictures? Can you show me what the staples look like? I was like, is it healing? Is it infected? So I was always like really curious about everything. One of my favorite gifts as a kid was this microscope set that I got when I was like 7 years old. So I've always liked to dissect things and just find out how things work. And I always liked people, so I thought medicine was kind of like a good mix of both. And yeah, she inspired me to go into medicine. And in high school, I joined a medical assistant vocational program. So I learned more about like in depth of what track I wanted to go towards as far as like an occupation. And in high school, I would say like 11th grade, I found the PA profession, which is physician assistant or like physician associate now. It's kind of interchangeable. And I decided to come to Gainesville and pursue my degree. So I did my AAS Santa Fe, and then right now I'm doing my bachelor's at UF. And I'm deciding to stay on that track for now. Hold on.
Great. So can I just get some clarification? When you were mentioning your current occupation, you mentioned you were a CNA.
Yes.
Can you kind of expand on what that acronym means, please?
Yes. I'm so sorry. I'm used to saying CNA all the time.
No worries.
Yeah, it stands for Certified Nurse's Assistant. So yeah, I help the nurse in whatever she needs. But I'm that person that has like my hands like caring for the resident, and the nurses just asks for my input, like if the resident's changed or if they need help with anything. So just keeping the nurses updated on any changes for the patients or residents.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So at what point did you learn that there were healthcare disparities within the healthcare field?
Right. So I always kind of noticed in my first job as a CNA out of high school during the summer, where I worked was in assisted living, so it wasn't as intensive as a long care or rehab, but I noticed that predominantly a lot of the residents were Caucasian women. And I always wondered, I don't see a lot of Black people, I don't see a lot of Latin people. I was like, why is not a lot of minorities? But I always kind of correlated it with my town because my town was predominantly white. So I was like, well, maybe that's the reason. But where I work now, it's still the same thing. It's predominantly Caucasian people. And the few minorities that live there, I always noticed that they were kind of overlooked, not given the attention they needed as far as meeting like the requirements of like the culture, language barriers, especially mental health for like the Latin men was definitely something that was marked off and kind of taken care of with medication more than rehabilitation in other ways. So I've noticed that's a pattern throughout my time there.
And so, I mean, were these kinds of healthcare disparities talked about, or have they been talked about within the courses that you've been taking at UF?
Definitely one of the courses that stuck out to me and kind of really opened my eyes that this is more of a national disparities as much as like community disparities was I think the course was called Global Health Disparities, and it talked about how like men, especially minority men, were less likely to seek out like mental health services, and how a lot of African American women were underdiagnosed in hospitals and rehabs. And it's just like a national thing. So that kind of helped me.
And you talked about how you noticed that people of color in these facilities weren't receiving the same kind of care, that they were kind of being neglected. In what ways were you seeing that kind of manifest at work?
Yes, so the first resident I can really think of was at an assisted living that I worked at. I noticed that, first of all, he was the only male, and like there were 16 other Caucasian females in a lockdown unit. The reason they were all in a lockdown unit is because they had a higher risk for, the term is whenever you leave a facility and like you're in danger of yourselves or other people. So they're in a lockdown unit. And I noticed that he always would stay in his room. Like no one ever really encouraged him to interact with the other the workers or other residents. And I always asked, I was like, why is he always there by himself? And they say, oh, like he likes to stay there. He likes to have his own like comfort zone type of thing. And the more I talked to him, first of all, there were like language barriers. He predominantly spoke Spanish. So I talked to him in Spanish and I'd be like, hola, like, ¿cómo está? And he would just open up to me and like say, oh, I'm just here bored. There's nothing really going on outside for me. So that's why he'd rather stay inside, which makes sense because most places that I've worked at, all they play is bingo, snack time, TV, and no one's going to be speaking Spanish or take the time to translate for him. And even on the rare days that they would encourage him to come outside, he'd sit in the same chair all day, like many others. So that was kind of the same, but people would just like set things in front of him and not explain anything to him. Like they wouldn't say like, oh, this is bingo. When we say this letter, match this token, you know, just kind of like make it look like he was interacting as like a face. And no one would really take the time to talk to him. Even if there were language barriers, you know, there's resources out there to help. But in the months that I worked there, he was very isolated, which was unfair.
Did you notice any instances where this language barrier led to um, uh, compromising the safety of the residents there?
Not for him. Another woman that I had helped at the rehab center where I worked at did have that happen to her. She was in her 70s, very small woman, Parkinson's. So with Parkinson's, residents, people with Parkinson's tend to shake a lot. And with her being so small and frail looking, a lot of people assumed, and especially since she had the language barrier, they would assume that she had like Alzheimer's or some kind of mental limitation that would like keep her from being able to understand what's going on around her. And that was so far from the truth. Like I talked to her, and then when she found out that I spoke Spanish, like she almost broke down in tears, because she was like, "Oh, these people don't understand what I'm saying. They think I'm crazy. Like I asked them to help me with this, and they leave me alone, and they don't help me with the things I need." And all I could do was like profusely apologize to her. I was like, a lot of these people are ignorant, and they don't know that like you don't have Alzheimer's, like you can speak for yourself. They assume because you shake and you're so small and you only speak Spanish that they're just written off as like mental illness. And there were occasions where the nurses would come to me and be like, "Oh, what is she saying? Does she want her pills or does she not want her pills?" And I was like, "Yes, she wants her pills, but at this time." But there are many other nurses that would be like, "Oh, she's not taking them. That means she doesn't want them. Don't give them to her." And that affects her in the long run because it interrupts her medication cycle. So that if her pills are interrupted, like everything else is going to be interrupted because her Parkinson's would act up. So that would keep her from eating and interacting with other people. So depending on the nurse and the nurse's, I guess, ability to use the resources and the people around them, like that would determine her day, like whether it was a good day or a bad day to the medication and everything else correlated with it.
You and I have also talked about how, regardless of race, the experience of residents in assisted living facilities can be so trying in just interacting with you know the healthcare professionals like you, just because there are so many people that they lose patience. And I wanted to know if you could share a little bit about what that is like in working in this environment that is very difficult. But you have workers, and it seems like from what you've said, like in every nursing home that you've worked at, this neglect that builds up after people have worked there for so long. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Everywhere I've worked, I've seen how, whether it be CNAs, nurses, doctors, tend to dehumanize these patients and these residents because it's just another case for them, you know? It's like, oh, another one with Alzheimer's, let's up the medication. It's like, oh, she's not eating, let's put a G-tube in her instead of trying to find things that she likes to eat, you know? A lot of routes that could be less invasive if someone were to take the time and actually talk to the resident and be like, why are you not eating? Oh, you don't like the food. We can find different food, you know? Simple things like that. And I've noticed that there are a lot of struggles in the health field when it comes to being understaffed, overworked, underappreciated, especially if an organization doesn't have the right culture to value and make their team members feel valued as an employee and an important part of the organization, like they're not gonna take pride in their work. They're not gonna have ethics in their work because they're like, oh, I'm just here for a paycheck. This person's elderly, no one's gonna listen to them anyways, and just kind of treat them however and whatever they want to do. So I've definitely seen that a lot more with minorities than Caucasian residents and patients. I would say like some of the factors for that is with a lot of like the Caucasian residents, I find that like the family is a lot more involved, as in like someone's always there, like it's being like their things are being kept track of, questions are being asked. And then as far as like for minorities, I've noticed like the family is there, but I don't know if it's just a fear to get involved or a fear to ask questions or question the doctor or question the nurses, that a lot of the care kind of falls through the holes for their family member that needs it. And being able to like make the family feel comfortable enough to ask these questions or give the family information that they might not think that they need to know to make sure the care is properly given to their family member is something that's really important that not everyone takes the time to do, because it's not in their job description, it's just decency. And sometimes it's hard for them to keep that decency whenever they have a whole bunch of stuff on their plate that needs to get done throughout the day. It's all about the person's priorities and ethics and morality when it comes to caring for their people in those ways.
It seems kind of scary because the patients, they don't seem to have the same kind of, I mean, obviously just not treated with the same kind of dignity as the workers there, but at the same time, you know, the workers need to be protected, and it's this balancing act that's so difficult. But I wanted to know what how the coronavirus has kind of, I mean, how has that affected your work, if it's affected it at all? What are the changes in procedure that you're seeing now that we're all dealing with this, and that you're dealing with this in these facilities?
Mm-hmm. There's definitely have been a lot more rules, a lot more regulations when it comes to my coworkers and I screening ourselves before we begin our shifts, by taking our temperatures and checking our oxygen saturations, bringing in a fresh uniform that we change into on-site before starting our shift, and then putting that same uniform into a dirty bag and changing to our street clothes after the shift, just so we don't take anything home with us, you know. As far as PPE, like many other facilities, they give us kind of like the minimal that they have in stock and can afford, I guess. So that's always been something, and that has been an issue for a lot of people, because you want to be protected and you want to protect your employees, but they just can't find any, supposedly, or they're out of them, supposedly. So that's been difficult to deal with. For any resident that lives there that has been just like, that goes out either due to dialysis or has symptoms close to COVID-19, they are quarantined and closely monitored until like the cycle is ended, that symptoms would show up. So that's different. Hand washing, it's always been an important thing for hand washing, but now they're really cracking down on it. And I think out of fear, people are just doing it more often now, even though it should have been done regularly before all of this. And I've noticed that they've tried to keep the morale a little bit more positive at work, especially since everyone is under stress with their personal life, and then still being understaffed at our job. A lot of people kind of just are in a bad headspace at work. So they try to like offer free breakfast and things like that to kind of keep positivity in the air. But it's very hard. Like everyone has their struggles, and it's hard for them to leave that at the door whenever they come to work. But as far as regulations, I would just say more PPE, personal protective equipment, has been enforced, stronger hygiene practices, and screening processes for our workers and residents.
I guess, have you seen a lesser number of resources available to you besides PPE in terms of like medication or anything that specifically like has to be delivered to your workspace since the whole pandemic started?
The only thing that I've noticed has been low in stock have been gloves, masks, gowns, disposable gowns. Thermometers have been hard to find, and the administration that I work with have had to go look for thermometers on their own personal time in like local CVS's and Walgreens just to make sure we have enough, which is kind of like makes it seem a lot more intense. Not any medication that I know of. I like in my job, I do not handle the medication. I haven't heard any nurses saying that they're low on anything. Thank God. Besides insulin, but insulin has been an issue for a long time now. So they have emergency stock of that as a precaution. And no, I think those are the main things, but I feel like it's kind of like a global issue now, the gloves, masks, and gowns.
I know in certain hospitals there's been an issue with people bringing their own masks and their own, I guess, their own ventilators and like protective gear into, you know, hospitals and medical spaces. Um, has that been an issue at your facility, or do you know what the protocol would be of bringing your own stuff? Because it seems you're bringing like thermometers from CVS and stuff. What is the protocol of bringing your own things to the facility?
So they haven't told us that we aren't allowed to make our own masks. I've seen a lot of creative ways people have been using their masks when it comes to like the cloth mask and the scarves and the bandanas. So we really haven't had any direction in it. We haven't had any direction on how to disinfect it after a shift or before a shift. So people are kind of going on their own and creating their own, because there have been times where people start a shift and our organization is supposed to supply us with a mask, but they have none to supply us with. So we're kind of just like left in the air. And people have been refusing to work or start their shifts until they receive that protection, which is a right and something that's promised by the organization. So people have just been taking that into their own hands. I think the organization actually prefers it, even though it hasn't been scientifically proven to like help against any viruses. But they kind of want people to bring their own masks and their own thermometers and their own PPE, as long as it's safe.
So it seems that there is some level of trust there that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess that either that there is this level of trust that the employees know how to sanitize the stuff that they're bringing in, or, and it may be coupled, it may be both things, that they're just not supplying or giving the resources needed to protect the employees. And just because this shortage just makes it so difficult to do that. So I guess you said that some people have resigned from or refused to start their shift with before getting the protective gear that they need. How has all of this affected your work and your personal life specifically?
As far as how my mentality has changed with the virus, there's definitely a lot more anxiety of like what I'm bringing into the facility or what I'm taking out, since symptoms can appear very like within the 2 weeks frame. Like you cannot have symptoms and still be a carrier. And so that's the only thing that's really like on my mind. But I always think about like my employees who have kids and family at home that they have to come home to, and they can't quarantine themselves completely. Because for me, it's just me and my spouse and my boyfriend. I mean, my spouse and my brother at the moment. So I know they're all pretty educated, and I'm educated to like clean myself and not bring in clothes from the facility. But I don't think everyone else kind of understands like protocols to make sure they're as safe as possibly can. So just the anxiety of making someone else sick in terms of my residents and my family has been something that's been on my mind constantly. But I could imagine that would be a lot higher with people who have children and that live with susceptible populations like their grandparents or people who are immunocompromised.
Yeah, I mean, your dad is in Sebring with your other brother, and you've been saying that you don't want to go home, even though you really want to go and see them. And I mean, you've said that you're concerned about giving them.
Yes, I don't want to bring anything to them at all. My dad is 65 years old. He's pretty healthy, but it only takes one person. That's what I tell him all the time. It only takes one object, one person, one instance to get it. So that's been holding me back from going home, even though I have a lot more free time. That's been something holding me back.
How has school changed?
School, so this semester I was doing an independent study, so I didn't really have to be on campus a lot anyways. My professor and I just communicated through email and with the assignments. And so that wasn't really different. I know over the summer I signed up for a course that usually has labs in person. So I'm kind of anxious about that and how that's going to be run. I know a lot of people in PA programs, physician assistant programs, have been kind of side railed with everything, especially students that are in the middle of their clinicals. A lot of those clinicals have been cut, which is delaying their graduation times. And even physician assistants, I've seen a lot of them have been cut hours or cut entirely from their positions because of like the change in elective surgeries and how everyone's kind of like minimalizing people's entrance into clinics and hospitals. So I know that's been affecting a lot of the people I know and follow on social media. But as for me, I just stick to my routine and 6-foot distance. Definitely putting that more into perspective, practice.
Lisa, did you have any more questions? I think she's focusing on the thing. But okay.
Sorry, for some reason I kept trying to connect to like the unmute button and it just like wasn't working. Let me see. Nothing pops up at the top of my head right now. But Suli, if you know of anybody else who works in healthcare or would also have like other perspectives, we would really appreciate you sending them our way. It's just not another interview question though.
For sure.
But yeah, Suli, is there anything else that you want to add to the interview that you think would be important to talk about?
Right. A few things on my mind with this pandemic going on. I think it really brings into light how we treat the essential workers of this nation around the world.
Mhm.
CNAs have been looked down upon, grocery baggers have been looked down upon, gas station workers have been looked down upon, and
Mhm.
for so long, and like now bringing to light that they are like essential functions for everyone's lives and days. So I out of like the good things that I hope that come out of this pandemic, I just hope that we appreciate each other more and that we find value in our jobs more to kind of hold ourselves up as like an essential part of everyone's life. And also just everyone kind of focusing on their mental health in this time. I know a lot of people's lives have been derailed, a lot of their plans have been put to a stop, but just taking this time to find peace and find calmness in the silence and the stillness and just supporting each other and being there for each other.
Thank you, Sueli. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like it's so frustrating that we're like, yeah, baggers at grocery stores and like farm workers and nurses and everybody, they don't deserve much more money that they're making, and then we have something like this and they're like still out here working and somehow they don't deserve better.
On the front lines, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
That
thank you
kind of
for
brings
saying
me
that.
to another question, actually, if that's okay.
Yay!
So I guess, Suli, like, I want to ask you if you consider yourself as part of that as an essential worker, and if so, or if you don't, kind of like how do you feel constantly putting yourself kind of like in this field of exposure? And I know you talked about speaking to your family and your partner and all these other people that you come into contact with on a daily basis, but how do you, I guess, mitigate that fear or that stress of constantly having to expose yourself with the essential work that you are doing?
Right. So it's definitely a sacrifice, but I can't see myself doing anything else, honestly. Like, my job is hard, it's messy, it's dirty, it's frustrating, but I'm able to like support patients and residents in a way that not a lot of other people have the patience for, have the time for. And I can feel the gratitude that a lot of these residents feel whenever myself or my other coworkers take the time to either like paint their nails or ask them about their life or just kind of treat them like people instead of just an old person, you know? Like they had a long life before they were stuck in a wheelchair or stuck in a bed. So that's always been my passion. No matter through all the nasty stuff that that's easily forgotten. But like when you make someone's day and they're on their deathbed or they have Alzheimer's and you're able to comfort them in a time of like mental confusion, like that's not something that a lot of people can experience. And it's very rewarding and it's something that like I said, I can't imagine myself doing anything else. And I feel like everyone should experience it, whether through volunteering or working as a CNA, some type of experience. Kind of molds you as a person, kind of like tells you who you are, you know, what you can do.
I know, like, for my part, like, it seems like, at least in the Latinx community, and this is something I think we wanted to talk about, like, we wanted to have, like, a solidarity session about this, like, about what retirement means for, you know, people in Latinx families. Sometimes, you know, a lot of the time, and this is just culturally, your retirement plan is your kids, and that's not always the case for a lot of people, especially like immigrants here who maybe they don't have kids, or their kids just, can't support them, and and maybe they can afford to go to a place like a facility, and in that case, like, um sometimes there's those language barriers and everything, but the idea in our culture is at some point you're gonna be wiping somebody's butt, and it's not gonna be your kid's butt. And it's and that should be the case, because you have to hope that someone's going to be taking care of you at some point, because, like it or not, you're going to get to that point. It's going to happen, and so everyone should take care of someone at some point in their life, which is why people like you are so essential. And I think there's not enough time that we spend actually thinking about people that are put in assisted living facilities, and a part of that, maybe that is by design, which is so scary, but I just rambled. But I mean, I guess, have you thought about that, like the cultural aspect of it, like within Latinx communities?
Definitely. I had went through that with my mother 2 years ago when she was diagnosed with cancer and ended up being terminally ill cancer. And on her deathbed, we had like options of sending her to hospice to be under someone else's care, or taking care of her at home. And my father was just like, a lot of Latinx and minorities feel about their families. Like, we're keeping them home. And there are times like where we needed resources, we needed extra hands, but because we didn't feel comfortable reaching out, or like my family didn't feel comfortable reaching out, that a lot of us suffered in ways that we didn't have to. If we're like put our pride to the side and reach out for companies that are professionals in some ways. And I know for my mother, whenever she took care of her father, my grandfather, she would work 8-hour days just to get off work and go take care of him until he was all set for bed, and making sure he was set for the next morning. So I feel like that's like in our culture to do, just like burnout is real, and we don't acknowledge it until we're in a hospital bed because of it. And I feel like we should break those chains of like being able to reach out and communicate and educate yourselves on the resources available, and know that there are bad people out there that might not take care of them as well as we can, but there are also really good people out there that this is their life passion, and we can find those resources to help us take care of our family or take care of ourselves.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Suli. I can't think of any more questions. But yeah, I think you are definitely one of those people that is so passionate about just caring for people, and the people that we forget about, and that is beautiful, and I'm so happy that people like you are doing that work. It makes me able to sleep at night. So thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share that you think would be important to add?
I think we're all capable caregivers. Yeah, it's like if you care for yourself and then use that same care for others, people are capable of a lot more than they give themselves credit for. There are things that I've had to deal with and I've had to do that I never thought that I'd be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like everyone needs to remember that when it comes to like, if they ever do have that fear of like, oh, I wouldn't be able to take care of my parents, or I wouldn't be able to reach out, or I don't know anything about this. You know, like the resources are there and everyone has the capability. Everyone has the power in themselves to reach out. So I think that's just important for everyone to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wait, it's muted. Hold on.
Oh, that's my bad. Sorry. Well, thank you I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Suli, for being a part of this and being our first interviewee for this project. Yeah, and thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I'm so
Thank
lucky that
you.
you're my friend and that we're all lucky that you just exist.
Yeah, thank you. We're really appreciative. I know that right now is a really tough time for everybody, so we really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us about this.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you both for just sharing this information and having it on a platform to reach so many people. I feel like that's a lot of power, and y'all handle it very well and talk about a lot of relevant topics that people don't think about, you know, and they should. So it's very valuable. So I thank you both.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording now.